Let me see this guy first.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to what I hope is going to be a very interactive and constructive conversation today. My name is Heather Gossard, and I am one of your two moderators today. I serve as a senior consultant and the director of consulting services for NCEA. And with me today as my co-moderator is Andrea Chavez-Kopp, Assistant Director for Education and Formation Programs at NCEA. At this time, Andrea is going to be explaining to you how you can become a very interactive part of the conversation. So Andrea, why don't you go ahead?
Thank you. You'll notice on your chairs around the room that there are little postcards that have a QR code as well as a URL. So if you would, we have a Padlet back channel going on, so if you want to enter comments or questions or reactions or share resources when the panelists are speaking, you're encouraged to do that. However, if you prefer to operate in analog mode, and just want to write things down, you're welcome to do that as well, and just put them on the back table. If you have a question or comment, or feel free to give it to me as I walk around the room, and we'll sort of pause for questions, and I will be happy to pose those. We'll also be running around the room with the microphone if you want to stand up and ask something, but you know, we've had this conversation before. Sometimes people are more comfortable sort of asking something anonymously or don't want to stand up. So in whatever format you wish to contribute, interview. We are happy to have you here asking questions and sharing your ideas.
Okay, and if you have any questions at all during the conversation to follow, Andrea or I will be circling the room. Okay, well, first of all, let me introduce our very distinguished panel today. We're very honored to have these people with us. I'd like to introduce first to you Mr. Tabari Coleman, and Tabari is the Education Director for the Anti-Defamation League Heartland office in the greater St. Louis area. Tabari has been with us before and is a good friend to NCEA and will be providing some wonderful resources for you throughout the conversation today. Next to him is Ms. Danielle Brown. She is the Associate Director of the Ad Hoc Committee for Racism for the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. So we are delighted to welcome Danielle with us as well. Then we have Mr. Henry Fortier, and Henry is the Secretary of Education and the Superintendent of Schools for the Diocese of Orlando, Florida. And again, Henry has been with us before, and he has a great deal to add to our conversation. Ms. Olga Gentry rounds out our panel today. She is the principal of St. Augustine's High School in Laredo, Texas. So thank you to all of this panel of distinguished educators and activists who are going to be leading us in a constructive conversation about how we have a constructive conversation about race, ethnicity, and overt and covert prejudice in our Catholic schools, in our homes, our parishes, and our communities. We are, my friends, in a time of heated secular politics, tragic and violent current events, many of them emanating from a legacy of ingrained prejudice and bias. And our panel is going to be sharing practical insights and observations, drawing from Catholic social teaching and other areas of their expertise. We want this to be an interactive conversation, and we urge you to participate in every way possible. Your voice matters as we seek to empower our Catholic school, pastoral, and community leaders to lead these critical conversations about racism and other biases which are being passed to our children generation after generation. So, let us begin. First of all, let's ask the question to our panel. What is racism? How can we recognize it?
To start off, if we could pull up those first sets of definitions. As we were preparing for today, actually, I can first say thank you to NCEA for inviting me again to be a part of this discussion, as well as engaging this community in this discussion. I think now more than ever, we all really need to be thinking more critically about our actions, about our inactions, and how they may be contributing to some of the challenges that we're currently facing. It's hard to have this conversation about race and racism without first defining some terms. I think we often use words that we assume we have a shared meaning, but in actuality, we may be talking about very different things. And so what we provided for you all is some definitions, first starting with what race is, focusing primarily on the fact that it's a social construct, one that we've created in this country primarily to advantage some and disadvantage others. When you think about racism, it is a manifestation of oppression. And so we provided you with a definition here, and I want to sort of pass it on to Danielle to talk about the pastoral's letter, the bishop's letter on racism, because that was a really key part of our discussion in deciding that we would continue our webinar and do this panel.
Sure, thank you so much. Likewise, I want to thank NCEA for inviting me here, and I want to thank all of you too. I'm proud molded me and formed me. And thank you so much for the work that you're doing and the donation of your life that you're making, because we all know that you're not in it for the bucks. So thank you. The United States Conference of Catholic Bishops just this past November did something very significant, and that was to approve a new pastoral letter on racism, which is called Open Wide Our Hearts, the Enduring Call to Love. And this document is especially timely and poignant for a number of reasons. The last pastoral letter on racism came out in 1979. So I'm just looking at some of you, most of you look like you're probably millennials. You may or may not have been born when the last letter came out. Those of you who were around may not it may not have hit your radar. And so it's important to point out that this pastoral letter, which is on the slide there, first of all, it's downloadable on the USCCB website, and you can Google the title USCCB and Racism, it'll pop right up. It's a PDF. You can also order it for your classrooms, especially if you're a high school teacher. It might be particularly useful for your school to order, and you can order packages of the bound volume. And the size is about that big, so it's 8.5 by 11 folded. Just so you know, so each one of your students could potentially have a copy, and you could do a lesson in your class if you're sociology, history, certainly religion. So keep those options in mind, particularly at the high school level. Also at the 8th grade level, I think it might actually be pretty useful for you informing your students. The earlier, the better, really. So, and going back to the year that the pastoral came out last, 1979, it's important to point out that there were several documents on racism throughout the history of the United States bishops at the conference. The name has changed over the years. The conference went by a different name around the Second World War, but I've been able to find documents wherein the bishops are talking about racism as far back as 1942, still working on finding instances where they spoke as a unified body. So that is not to mention any number of the individual bishops across the nation who have been writing on racism over the years for the last several decades. So this is not the first time that the bishops have spoken with one voice. It's certainly not the first time they've spoken on a matter, period. So it's important to note that this letter was about 4 years in the making before it was actually approved. There are several that want to say that it was a politically timely message out of the U.S. conference, but the coincidence of the rhetoric in the United States on racism really hitting a fever pitch was coincident. So the last thing I'm going to stop with is two things actually. So first off, we'll point you to the USCCB website because we have resources that we put together for every level of education from kindergarten through campus ministry in case you want to download activities for your classroom and be looking to the website at least quarterly to see updates on those things. So what do the bishops define racism as? And I believe that it was on the previous slide, but it is when either consciously or unconsciously a person holds that his or her own race or ethnicity is superior and therefore judges persons of other races or ethnicities as inferior and unworthy of regard. So that is where the bishops start out.
And for the timely part of the question, why now? When we look at our culture and society at large, the intolerance that we see overall with each other, whether it's a political view, whether it's a religious view, whether it's race-related, ethnic-related, it seems to be hitting a fever pitch in what I would call the selfishness of society, where it's my views and I don't care about anyone else. seems to have grown to a level where we're self-destructing in many ways. And so, why now? Because the intolerance continues to grow. And at any time when there's injustice, now is the right time. And so from my perspective, why now it's critical because we continue to grow in this intolerance. And as Catholic school educators, we have a unique opportunity, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because of the gospel message that motivates us, drives us, and should be the force, the foundation of everything we do, calls us to this. It demands it. It demands a conversation.
What about the rest of our panelists? We all ask this question, why now? Why is it so critical in this day and time to have this conversation? Olga, do you want to respond to that?
When we talk about whether it is or is not a political issue, I think why now? Because the things that are happening in our world, things that us as Catholic educators, as Catholic parents, things that our children are exposed to daily, in social media, on TV, maybe discussions that are brought to the classroom. I'm a high school principal, so definitely discussions that are brought to the U.S. history class or the religion class. And we can have an impact and we can make a positive difference by, first and foremost, modeling tolerance and sympathy and compassion and concern as true athletes.
The way I'd like to answer the question is to throw a question out there to you all. What would you say is the current climate in the country right now? How would you describe it? Just call it out.
Hostile.
Divided, disgusted, hostile, hopeful, insecure, so fearful, right? So would you say that the majority of what you all said, would you agree that those are negative things, that currently the climate isn't good? Yeah. All right, show of hands, how many of you all feel personally responsible for that? Feel personally responsible for the current climate? I want you to take a look around right now. I asked that question of every audience. Let me make sure I have my hand up. I asked that question of every audience. Now let me ask, the people who you think, so the majority of you all don't have your hands up, the people who you think are responsible, do you think they think they're responsible? So if I understand this correctly, there are 8 of us in the room who are responsible, and the rest of us are not. And so then who's working on these issues? And I throw that out there to you all in response to Heather's question about why now. The why now should have happened 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And so the why now for me is absolutely, it's in our face and we're seeing it. And we're seeing how it's trickling down to various individuals and families and students. But these are issues that have always been in our community. They just haven't been at the forefront. And now that they are, there's a confusion for some about what to do. And so I try to keep politics out of this. And so I don't want to blame everything on 45 and suggest that he, as one person alone, is responsible for the attitudes that so many people carry around. And in asking you to think about what the current climate is and your responsibility, what I'm asking is how do we all take ownership? It's great that we're starting this conversation off by thinking about the ways that we may view racism and think about racism, but there's so much more that we need to be acknowledging and thinking about in our own behaviors, the things, not only the things that we're doing, but the things that we aren't doing that might be contributing to the current climate.
Well, and I think you bring up a good point, right? Because when we talk about the current political climate, the only thing it did was take the lid off the can. All the contents were there. And when we look at the bishop's pastoral letter, one of the points that I think is very strongly made is we're all responsible for it. Everyone in here should have their hand up because we are in this together. We are one family in God. And when one suffers, we all suffer. And so it's everyone's responsibility, and we all take part in it in our own ways, whether doing nothing, saying nothing in the moment, not dedicating our entire life to fighting against this injustice. But we're all part of that family, so that makes us all responsible. And I think that point is very strong in the bishop's document.
It is, and the other thing that's really strong in the bishop's documents is that the bishops name names, and like I know the Diocese of Lansing's in the house, I see you, but they specifically name one of the cities in the diocese, and they say that this city specifically was responsible for restricting resources to an area of the state that is majority persons of color. So they're naming names in this document, and they point out, I think what Brother Tabari and Dr. Horton here, Gentry is saying, which is that there has been very limited formal acknowledgement of the harm done to so many, no moment of atonement, no national process of reconciliation, and all too often neglect of our history. And so in terms of who's responsible for attacking this, I have to say a couple of things. First of all, those of you who raised your hand and said I'm responsible, good for you. Those of you who didn't, don't be hard on yourself because you're here, you're in this room. And there are, 99% of the conference is not in this room. So pat on the back, you guys realize that there's something up. That's the first thing. Second part of this is that, that we all know that this has never been done. Not in a serious way, and certainly not in a serious way writ large in the Catholic Church. And what I keep telling people, and what I really infuriate people by saying, is that this is a spiritual issue. Yes, it's a social justice issue. Yes, we can talk about that in that sense. But when we talk about racial justice being a social justice issue, what comes to mind? Is it things in the natural or things in the spiritual? Come on, teachers. Things in the natural or things in the spiritual? Okay. So what I'm positing, folks, is that on some level, on the spiritual level, we have to move the fight into the spiritual. And that is where we can draw upon our deep roots as Catholics. And we have to really start understanding some things about metaphysics, in my opinion. Well, metaphysics, how does that fit in here? Okay. If we are all the body of Christ, and we all on some level have a God particle in us, that's what we believe as people of faith, as Catholics. We all believe that we have an irrepeatable aspect of God that is inside of us. That means that everyone in the human family makes up an entire body that is Christ on a metaphysical level. And so what does it mean that there are significant parts of the body that are not receiving the same access to education, the same access to resources in the community? What does it mean that parts of our body aren't receiving the same access and availability to the life-saving sacraments of the Catholic Church? And so we have to start as Catholics especially joining together the idea that our faith really can save lives, and we have to equate that with the body of Christ. And
But I do know that we have, thank you, a ton of questions that already have come to the panel. So Andrea, will you start giving us the first few?
Yes, and this is kind of speaks to what you've already talked about in the political climate, and this question got upvoted a little bit as well, so I know it's on more than one person's mind. With the current political climate, which is very divisive, what advice can you have to addressing communities or parents who may see a conversation about racism as somehow a barrier to their support for their political leanings, or how do you have a conversation about shutting someone down right away? I need a challenge and keep it in mind.
Good question, panel.
Well, in my past, I've worked in the Archdiocese of Baltimore as a teacher, principal, associate superintendent. I worked in the Archdiocese of New York. I actually started teaching from That was my first teaching career. And throughout my time, and now being in Orlando, I've had a broad experience of situations, whether it be in Baltimore when we were merging schools and when we were having the town hall meetings and one group of parents saying, I'm not putting my children in school with those kids. Or just recently, I think I have a slide here with an email as an example. This is a teacher that I had. This was going to be his yearbook photo. And they were putting that in the yearbook, and this is the email from a parent. And this didn't happen 30 years ago, this happened a couple weeks ago. And so you read in the email from the parent, comments. Go to the next slide, the email continues. Parents, we are a sum total of our experiences, and we bring to our lived experience those things that we've been taught, we absorb. And so this parent is attacking the principal, who is an African American woman, who was put into the position a few years ago, first African American high school principal in the entire county, public or private. And so this is what we're dealing with now. And before she entered that position, we had a very strong conversation about the reality of what we're walking into, but what we needed to change so that all children were treated as a child of God. Because prior to that, the Black students were put into remedial courses, and white students were all in the advanced courses. And this gentleman was the one who taught remedial courses and would throw a monkey to the students to answer questions. So confronting that is very difficult, and it takes extreme courage from my perspective. And just recently there was a TED Talk about vulnerability and how nothing courageous or brave can be done without making yourself vulnerable. And so in our vulnerability, we have to stand up to this. And so this is the parent sending the email. There's no way of getting through to that person. None. The dialogue with me, I just took the principal out of it because there was no way she was going to continue to be abused by this person. But we did have to put security there. There's no way to enter into a dialogue. So that has to be shut down. There are opportunities from my perspective in other situations. If you go back to the bulletin board, another one of my schools, the community was, students were predominantly African American and Haitian, all the teachers and administration was Caucasian, white. Teachers saw nothing wrong with this. The hostility was not there, but there was an opportunity for dialogue and discussion. Very hurt, very offended, but inviting the person to think beyond their own experience and understanding why this might be offensive where every student's name is on a banana.
So I think part of the problem too, particularly with these two examples, is that it's either a teacher who has no clue about what's offensive to people of color, or it's the parent. And so there's got to be a baseline where both teachers and parents start to educate themselves about those things. And particularly, people who are migrating across, state lines to go work in a new environment, particularly Northerners going south, Southerners going north, etc. It calls to mind an example. I moved to a town in my college years where there was a coffee house called Beaners. And I saw no problem with it until I started becoming friends with some Mexican students on campus. And I said, oh my goodness. and clearly I'm a person of color, and so that company actually, and again, this isn't a college town, changed their name, and multiplied exponentially after they were able to do that. But it's one of those basic things where, and the pastoral letter points to this, people are subconsciously and unconsciously tripping through all sorts of racist behavior. And the behavior that they're tripping into has been racist and has its roots back in slavery in some instances. And how we fail to convey that to ourselves and to our students, I think, is a problem that we all, as influencers of young people, have to really examine. And there's a great argument for every school district to examine their curriculum and to see how well they are or are not conveying the truths about the lived experiences of people of color.
And it's not just, I think before we talked via a phone conference last week, it's not just about black and white, it's not just about skin color, it's about national origin, it's about cultural background. So I'm a principal in Laredo, Texas. We are probably as south as we can be in Texas. We border Mexico, we're Laredo, probably west of Mexico, by the Rio Grande River. So when we're talking about the wall, that is our backyard, 30% of my students cross the bridge daily to come to school, Catholic school in the United States, with student visas, with I-20s, doing it the right way, parents making a tremendous sacrifice. So they get paid in pesos, not worth as much as, when they've got to transfer it to dollars to pay tuition, because they have the same values of the children sitting in those classrooms that are also Hispanic, Latinos, in a Catholic school, but they were born in the United States or live in the United States. It's selecting our school for the same reasons, that they want to provide the very best educationally and in faith formation for their children. My school is 96% Catholic, 96% Hispanic. So within our four walls, let's say, I think they're safe. For the 91 years of our school has been in existence, students have crossed that bridge to come to school in the United States. Just recently, my baseball team, many of which are boys for the first time coming to school, or ninth grade in the United States, faced another Catholic school within our TAPS, Texas Association of Private and Parochial Schools. So the organization by which we can compete athletically. And I was not aware that they faced the problem last year because they didn't tell me until this year. They're on the baseball field and they are being told by the boys of another Catholic high school, go back to Mexico for a bunch of wetbacks. What are you doing here? Now, my boys knew better. Coach was livid, but controlled himself. This comes to us the next day because, of course, this happened when we were playing in their hometown, not in ours. And I said, I'll call the principal. My AD said, no. I talked to their AD. He's going to take care of it. There shouldn't be an issue. And, the boys were worried this year when it came time to play them. Their parents were worried. I was worried for, the parents. We can try to control the kids, but it's very hard for me to control parents. So this year, playing that same team at home, and we start, we're losing by 6, 7, 8 runs. Well, we catch up. We're winning. Their coach misbehaves, gets ejected, and I'm literally standing right by the parents, ready to say, no comments, please don't say anything. I didn't have to because they didn't, because the boys knew. We don't say anything. We'll talk to our coach, we'll talk to the principal, we'll talk to the AD, we'll let the grown-ups handle it. But it's tough and very hard for those boys to keep quiet and keep playing when they are definitely being mistreated because they are from Mexico.
If I want to go back and just make sure that I understand the question. So, one of you all or several of you all were asking about how do we make sure in the current political climate that we don't make certain families feel as if, or individuals feel as if we're targeting their political views. I appreciate you mentioning that the conversation initially was very much black and white, and that there are a lot of identities that get targeted. And so one of the ways that you all can have these conversations is one, to just start having them. Be consistent about what it is that you're talking about. It is not a diversity program or presentation or a session if the conversation is just about race. If you are choosing to do one just on race, then you need to acknowledge that that's what it is. We can no longer lump things into things that they are not. I think the ways that you pull people on board is by helping them understand that this is about respecting differences. And so I don't want a child whose family was a supporter of our current president to feel targeted in that school environment in the same way that we don't want students who have other identities being targeted. And so I think when you focus on the facts of the situation, and this is really about encompassing respect for all differences, you pull people in. I think you have to drip. This cannot be something that you decide you're going to do on September 30th as a way of kicking off the school year and then not having a conversation again. You have to have it in September and October, November and December, and so on. And what I mean by that is being intentional, understanding that this needs to be incorporated into everything that we do because it's affecting everything that we do.
Absolutely, and I think, a big part of it, again, in the Catholic school context, being proud of the Catholic school context is, I had to be in my mid-20s before I started hearing about Black saints on the road to sainthood. Why? I went through each one of my catechism classes within the context of my grade schools and my high schools, and rarely saw people of different ethnic backgrounds represented. To say nothing about the truth about Native American history, which the pastoral letter actually delves into really well. The truths about even the atrocities that slavery was and still generationally manifests within our culture, which again the bishops also delve into in their letter. I learned all about that at the hands of my mother, who was an educator herself. And so what am I saying? I'm saying that my Catholic school experience wasn't the home for the truth of the American experience, unfortunately. And so, I would challenge you educators, especially, and those of you who have influence over curriculum, those of you who have influence over what your teachers emphasize, to normalize the experiences of different ethnic groups across the curriculum and across the calendar.
Okay, we have several questions in the chat about microaggressions.
Good.
How to address them student to student, how to address them with a fellow member of the faculty, and how to examine them in ourselves. I know that's a lot.
Fast about examining them in yourselves, and I know I keep pushing the pastoral letter. Show of hands, has anybody here read the pastoral letter yet? Okay, thank you. The rest of you, for examining microaggressions in yourself, what I'm telling people to do is read the pastoral letter in your prayer time, in a spirit of prayer, and ask the Holy Spirit to clarify for you the points that make you mad, the points that make you sad, and the points that make you whatever else happy. Because I really believe the Holy Spirit can speak to you through your reactions to a document like this. So start there for yourself.
And if I could, and I in no way mean to contradict that, because I think that is a great starting point. There is a lot of jargon out there. There's a lot of whatever the catchphrase of the month is. When I hear that term microaggressions, I'm not sure if we're all talking about the same thing, right? So it goes back to wanting to define terms. I think right now people hear things and they say, well, how do I address this? You know, well, what exactly are you addressing? Are you addressing that somebody said something that made you uncomfortable, putting that into that box of a microaggression? I think it's important, and this is a shameless plug, but this is what I do for a living. I think you need to identify who the resources are in your community and figure out how you bring them in to support your work. It's not about just finding that one person that you heard is doing a good job or that somebody necessarily recommends, but really doing your homework to make sure that the person you put in front of your teachers and put in front of your students and your families is going to be able to move that conversation along when it gets difficult, because it's going to get difficult. We have not done a good job in our society of talking about these issues, and so there's a hesitation. Going back to that first question of how do we prepare for some of the things that might happen. If we started this a long time ago, we wouldn't be in the place we're at now. I'm not trying to go to the past, but I'm trying to say that there's something that you can do tomorrow that can begin this conversation and be consistent about that. Because the issue of microaggressions, how many of you all know where that phrase came from? Okay. How many of you all have ever heard that word microaggressions before? Right? So a lot of you heard it, but you don't know where it came from. Right? The Columbia professor DeWald Su coined the term microaggressions. Right? And if you look up look him up, he's got a book called Microaggressions in Our Lives. MTV has some great resources that I utilize. There's a number of great things out there, but you don't want to just decide that you've seen a great video and you're going to show it in your class, right? You need to make sure that you're prepared for what are some of the issues that come up when they have examples. Well, is this a microaggression? Do you know when to say, I'm really not sure, right? Does it fit within that definition? So there's a lot of pre-work that has to be done, and I'm always encouraging educators to find out where your local resources are and utilize them. You don't want me coming in, if you're a chemistry teacher, just because I know how to read. You don't want me teaching a chemistry class because I'm reading the book, right? And so the same is true for the work around social justice advocacy. You want to make sure that the people who are there are prepared to deal with some of the issues that come out as a result of the comments that are made and where the discussion flows.
Andrea, what was the second part of that question?
Well, there were several. One is how to respond when you see it student to student, and then how to respond to a colleague. And then I think you sort of addressed the seeing it yourself.
I think in both of those situations, both seeing them certainly seeing it in a student is going to be a lot easier to address, one would hope, than addressing with your colleague. But when I think of microaggressions and I've experienced them, they've always been in the context of, first of all, it feels like a slap in the face, nobody's touched you. And then secondly, you're pretty sure somebody just said something to you because of the way that you look. And so for me, those are the ways that microaggressions always come across, well, in recent memory. And so the first question I would suggest that you ask the person who you think is the source of the microaggression. I would ask that person why they said what they said or why they did what they did. And I would stop the action. I would, in fact, freeze everybody. And this particularly works student to student. Why did you say what you said? And then the person who's receiving it, you stop them, you ask them if they are okay, and you say, what are you experiencing right now? And I think in those situations, I think, student A who may have delivered the microaggression has an opportunity to actually do some self-examination. Whether or not you would do that publicly or you would isolate those two, it's up to the situation, of course. But particularly, I think in classroom conversations, I was in elementary school and middle school in the late 90s, and I can remember conversations and great debates that we were able to enter into, which is really where I learned how to engage the idea and not the person, where students who had learned that lesson would be essentially discounting my opinion because either I was Black or I was a woman or I was in a situation that was public. So that is something for you to think about.
If I could add another layer to that.
And also, we really would like you to address colleague to colleague. We've heard that over and over again, that becomes a very difficult situation.
Yeah, the challenge that I face a little bit, and even in one of the examples you gave, is that the simplest way I would to say to respond is with grace. How many of us have made mistakes and said things that came out differently than we had intended, right? And so if in this moment, it's like, hold on, we're stopping. We got to check. Olga, how are you feeling? Right? What are you thinking? And Olga might not have had the same reaction I was having based on what I observed. If the current climate is such that right now there's a lot of tension, then some of that tension may be manifesting in how you engage with those, whether they be your colleagues, family members, or students. And so let's go to being proactive. If we're going to talk about microaggressions, because these are things that are showing up, then let's have a conversation next week when we get back about here's something that I have been exposed to, and I'm curious what your thoughts are. So at least we have this baseline to start from. Because if you're saying that this is something that I don't even know what you're talking about, then it creates some tension, right? And ultimately, what we're trying to get to is this place where we all communicate more effectively with each other. And the way that we do that is by listening to one another, by holding space. When I say have grace, what I would say is in this moment, well, can you tell me, what did you mean by that? Because what I meant by that might be different than how you interpreted it, right? Because there's that tension is there, and I don't want, as I look out in this room, and take a look around the room, right? I want you to think about who's present and who's not. I want you to look demographically at who's in the room and who's not. When I got here 2 hours ago and was walking through the convention, right, I saw a whole lot of people, and I saw a whole lot of people that didn't look like me. Right? And I'm not judging that. I'm saying you all need to be aware of that in the same way that I'm aware of that every time I step out into the world. And so when you think about these conversations you're approaching, you're bringing your identities into those spaces. So we have to do so in a way that's patient and that recognizes that we all have things to learn. Right? We're all teachers and learners in this process, and we want to make sure that we're doing it with fidelity.
And along those lines, in the bishop's document, when Tabari, you talk about grace, doing it with grace. From the bishop's document, everything is out of the basis of love for the other person. And that when I'm engaging you in this conversation, it's because I love you. And I want to help you to grow and to be more Christ-like and to experience God's love in a more deep and full way by embracing all of his family. So in the challenging or dialogue with a colleague, that can be very problematic. It can create a lot of tension. But that's where the part of courage comes in. Because even if you stumble, it's better to open the dialogue than to say nothing. Because the sin of omission is the same as the sin of the action. By not saying anything, your behavior gives the permission to the action. And that's also addressed in the bishop's document. So engaging that dialogue, asking the question, even if it gets a little funky and it gets awkward, you may have to go back to it later on, but engage that person. Don't let it slide. And I hear frequently, everybody's just so sensitive today, everybody's politically correct. We're just making a nation of super sensitive kids. That's crap. That is a bunch of garbage. All that is an excuse to remain ignorant. The person does not want to feel uncomfortable. They don't want to change because take it as it is. This is who I am. I'm in New York, I'm very familiar with that. But the reality is they just don't want to budge. And so they're comfortable in that. Doing an examination of your conscience, which I do have a slide of that came from the USCCB website, right there. It can make someone very uncomfortable because when I had to work with the faculty at that school that had a bulletin board up, they were offended that I would think that they were racist. And I didn't say anything, I just said this is wrong. And they could not wrap their minds around it, and they were offended and hurt. And again, this is on the USCCB website as a resource. And it was because it was challenging them in their comfort zone. In order for them to become aware that they have these challenges, you have to go through and accept the fact that you were taught some really nasty stuff as a kid. That your experiences created this construct in your mind. The parents that you love, that you idolize, those that we hold up on pedestals, they have contributed to where I'm at today, and that is a long journey. And as superintendent in that community, I contracted with Dr. Carolyn Hobbs from UCF, who has her specialty is multicultural education. Carolyn came in, I paid out of my office budget, because the school doesn't have a lot of money, in order for her to meet and start working with them. But at the same time, from my perspective as superintendent, there's a time limit on this. I don't have a lot of time to wait while someone goes through a conversion process, because every day it's at the expense of the lives of the students that I've been entrusted with God. So as we started to go through this, and she was meeting with them, you can sense the ones that were like, okay, I need to learn, and then the others that were resistant and really weren't going to change much, and that was all included the school administration. They had to change. I didn't have time, from my perspective, to wait for them to do that, because it was at the expense of these children. So that dialogue is very important, but it's a self-discovery process, and as we've said with different groups, whether it be Hispanic community, Asian communities, we're always learning, we're educators. So as we learn, we become more aware of things that societally we've been programmed with that is offensive.
Also, I want to bring up too the situation where you are a teacher and your student brings to you microaggression, you just don't see it. It's hugely problematic. It's something that, again, my hometown has dealt with pretty acutely over the last few years. And so in that situation, I think that you're really going to want to call upon, if there's a teacher that you know that has a particular aptitude for that area, and you're still going to want to call them in. You're going to want to call, hopefully you've got friends in your friend group. And again, as teachers, as administrators, as educators, if we don't have people in our friend group who look different from us, how are we going to teach our kids to want to do that? Okay, so this really is this is an inside job. And so when a student brings to you a microaggression that punches you in the gut, as in, I don't think that you're right, you really got to freeze the situation, gain more information, and seek out people who are close to you or within your school to learn more about the situation, because I can, again, with my own life, talk to you about situations where people wrote off my egregious encounters with racism because they just didn't see it. And it took me years to heal from those things, and you don't want to be the reason that happens in somebody's life.
And what I'd like to do is, before we go to any more that have been recorded, would like to ask if any of you in the audience, Andrea has a microphone on this side of the room, I have a microphone, would any one of you have a comment or like to ask a question to the panel? Okay.
I'm not sure if you're familiar with what happened with the Native elder person in Washington, D.C. with the content.
Sorry, not to be.
What is your opinion on that?
Oh, Cal, who wants to touch that with Honestly, there were so many layers to the situation, and I think, again, I'm going to find there were a lot of layers to the situation. I think you really had to look at the entirety of the circumstance. I think that, no matter what level of competency you have, racially speaking, you could make an example of the situation for just about in the world.
There was layers of responsibility that
Absolutely.
fell in all different directions, from chaperones not removing students from a situation that they shouldn't be in, to, at least in my school, we try to limit the political motivations of our students. So the hats to begin with, and it's not to say that one is greater than the other, but we know, especially at this time, things are charged. So, not to put ourselves in those situations. So there was plenty.
Coincidentally, before you started, I got all of the definitions for the different terms from 2 different dictionaries. Because I believe that part of the problem is what you started with. People have different definitions in their heads and their mindsets and what they were raised with about what racism is, or what cultural appropriation is, or what discrimination is. And when they see through social media, texting, all the different channels of information that are unfortunately, and I say that, I'll repeat that, unfortunately available to young developing minds, they cannot discriminate themselves or discern what the real definition might be from the person who's using it. I'm intrigued about the document from the bishops, but I think part of the problem is an overgeneralization of these terms. So there is always a negative connotation, for example, to something that uses racism. I am the daughter of an immigrant who migrated into this country. And I have children who were also born in Latin America. But you can't imagine how they might come into a situation and because of the color of their skin, people will tell them they have white privilege and they're racist. They know nothing about the children, they know nothing about their heritage. So there's this overgeneralization going on, and I'm wondering at the school levels, what can we do to try and help the children understand that yes, there's this negative connotation with what's going on, but the overgeneralization is hurting them because they're being felt like they're attacked, and I think the adults are as well.
What do you mean by overgeneralization? I think I may know what you mean, but.
Okay, for example, if you even look up the idea of cultural appropriation online, people were talking about how offensive it is to see somebody that has a tattoo of a dream catcher. If they are not Native American, they've offended everybody who's Native American. Well, most of the people that I know that go into tattoo shops nowadays, some of them research their tattoos, some don't. You just go in and say that's beautiful, catch dreams out of it. They haven't meant to offend anyone. But then they can be attacked when they are seen that. How dare you do that? Do you not understand how important that is to the Native American people? It's your right to have. Do you see what I'm saying? And then it hurts all of us. It hurts all of us, and people start to hear things and they can't hear it anymore because they've taken a defensive thing.
Yeah, it's so as someone who has a lot of tattoos, I researched most of them. And I researched my reading, and I could go down the rabbit hole there. But here's the way that I think about that. I think you're absolutely correct that right now we are dealing with, as a society, at times an overcorrection to things that have been done in the past. This emphasis on what young people need to do and the definitions that young people have and that they're exposed to does not take into account that every single one of you sitting in this room right now is exposed to some of those same things. I am unwilling in my daily life to give adults credit just because they're adults. It does not mean that you know more than young people, right? We can have a conversation about adultism, right? We can have a conversation that because we have degrees, it means we know more than other people. And the reality is that what you were saying earlier about where is credit given for lived experiences? And so I think that all of us have to be mindful of engaging in these conversations, helping young people understand that in their quest potentially to be activists, to be allies, to be aware, sometimes they can be causing more harm. But if you haven't done your own work, I don't need you trying to correct me or trying to correct the young people around me, right? You have to do your own work. I can say that for the rest of my life, and it will still be those of us that want to go out and want to help other people understand how to do better and be better without first looking at themselves. And I think that's what's really important.
Thank you for having this conversation. I'm really happy to know that it's actually happening here at NCEA. My question would be, particularly for the superintendent, how do you address the historic legal determination of race which underpins the system of racism that we have here in this country? There is a unique quality to the racism here, that it's a legal definition. People are categorized into these different areas, and has been going on for 400 years. So do you teach that in your schools? And if so, how do you teach that? And what texts do you use?
Well, I think, first of all, it's a slow, steady process. Coming from being associate superintendent in New York City, and then coming down to being superintendent in Orlando, Florida, where I am in the South. And although Orlando is a fairly large city, I'm in 8 counties that are not large cities. And I was a bit shocked when I arrived and visiting and experiencing certain things. And so, first, the consistency and the push. I think one person referred to it as a drip process rather than the fire hose, because if I blast everybody, I lose them. And inviting people into the conversation, consistent, regular professional development, auditing materials, inviting teachers to audit their educational materials. We had textbooks that were being used, happened to be the same county as that teacher, surprise. But in those Catholic textbooks, it refers to the KKK as a mischievous group of white young men. And that is a Catholic textbook. It talked about the Native American Indians contracting smallpox and dying because they refused to convert and become a part of Christ's family. So being attentive and aware of what materials are in a classroom, exposing teachers to regular, consistent, ongoing, healthy multicultural education resources and materials, and making it a part of everything we do, but doing it through an invitation and a dialogue grounded in our spirituality. From my perspective, and having this conversation repeatedly in various areas, to me helps to be a game changer in our schools. Because when you're looking at it from a faith perspective, a gospel message perspective, a spiritual perspective, it takes the attack of me against you, or the divide, and it unifies because of our gospel message. And so, but at the same time, there is a line in the sand that I draw, and you're fired. I mean, I don't know how else to put it, but the reality is, if you're damaging my children, you're fired. And this damages, this destroys. And so, as a leader and as a superintendent, I first have to look and evaluate my leaders in schools. Because as I look at that from a systemic approach, I'm looking at my basic principles and who I have and the cultures they create within their schools, because a school will always reflect its leader. And so I have to evaluate who my players are. And I'll be honest, I've been there 8 years now. I probably have changed 80% of the leaders. Some naturally retired. It was a very different system. And others worked and came to a better understanding. But I can't allow that. Because at the end of the day, from my perspective, I have to answer to my Lord and Savior when all is said and done for what I did with responsibility that was given to me.
We have several questions in the chat and they've been upvoted about having conversations about white privilege, and having conversations about race in predominantly white schools.
I think that has threads of what the educator in the back, I think, was trying to point to. And I think that there's a level of protectionism that some folks who are European American want to kind of hedge around themselves when it comes to these topics. And I think that I've faced that in my own work, where, you know, it is for the body of the church in America, but, you know, there are certain amongst my colleagues who can't bear themselves to equate the word racism to anything but the KKK burning crosses on lawns, and I can't be racist because, see, I watched Oprah when she was still on the air, and I lived next door to this one family and things like that. And so, number one, you know, people have to stop treating themselves like delicate flowers and grow a bit of skin. And what I've said to my colleagues in the past, and what I've said certainly to these my co-panelists, is that, you know, there is an element of bearing the cross with those who deal with this on a daily basis. We've got to get people of European descent in America to understand that we are not going to get past this. We are not going to get over it as a country until all of us realize that we've got to get under that cross and shoulder the legacy of racism in America, because that is what we have been left with.
And to say get over it, I liken it to, we have every year Independence Day. The British didn't say, don't get over it. Why do you guys keep celebrating this? Get over it, move on. We remember things, we celebrate, we recall things so that we continue to learn from our past and grow. So from my perspective, there is no point when we get over it, because it's a part of who we are as a country.
Ken, I want to, it's been so many things that have been said, and I've also been wanting to hear Olga's voice as somebody who, as an administrator at a school, I think can contribute some things that broaden. So before I sort of chime in, I want to contribute space.
We're talking about the 4th of July, Independence Day, and we think about, you know, we are a country of immigrants, and that's how our country was, you know, was found. And back to, you know, what's really happening, you know, in this world. You see it on the news. We see it in person, you know, on the border. Discussion of closing the bridges and kind of what that did to my students from Mexico, wondering, is the bridge going to close, and we can't go home at 3 o'clock because we can't get back to Mexico. Us having to make decisions as school administrators, okay, what's the plan? You know, if the bridge, you know, does close, and where are we holding these children? Do they have family? Do they have friends? Where they can go? It's reality. And I think if we all look at these issues, first and foremost, as Catholics or as people with Catholic values, and really think these immigrants, they are people. They are people with basic needs. And we believe in helping and providing and doing what needs to be done. And I know that's what dioceses across the nation are doing. We're probably having to do more because of where we're located. And but it's a lesson that we are teaching our students, because it's happening.
Tabari, just a quick question for you. Is white privilege sort of like the AP of understanding racism? Like if there is an understanding of racism 101, you know, where does white privilege, because it seems to me that it just seems so advanced, like you ain't ready type.
Yes.
Like I don't know.
And that's, yes, and that's where I was going to go with you all, and I promise I see you with the microphone, so I'm coming to you right next. said to you all earlier that you need to identify what resources are available for you. The ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, we're all over the country. We've got 28 offices. There's education divisions. We've got folks that have been doing this work. We can come in and support that. I don't say that as a shameless plug. I say that because we have been doing it for a long time and we do it well. If you all ask me tomorrow to come in and do a conversation, lead a discussion on white privilege, my answer would be no. And it isn't that I don't think it's an important conversation to have. It's one that I'm going to start off and asking you, what did you do last week, last month, last year? How do you prepare folks? We cannot, to the woman's comment in the back of the room about cultural appropriation and all of these different definitions of racism, you cannot, what is your goal? Anybody that I meet with, any institution, any organization, what do you want to come out of this? It has to be fleshed out. Ultimately, for me, I'm trying to get folks to communicate more effectively with each other. And so if your student or staff goes home and says, tomorrow we're having a conversation on white privilege, what do you think is going to happen? Your phones, your emails, there's going to be so much stuff that's coming up. However, if you said that because of what's going on in the country, we see a value in all students being able to come into this institution and to be able to learn. And so we're going to be talking about differences. We're going to be talking about multiple identities. We're going to be talking about where some folks are advantaged and others are challenged. And from there, you're going to build. So if you start in August, maybe in February or March, you might be ready to go there. Now, I'm not saying that I have all of the answers, because one of the things that came up in the question about definitions of racism, we don't all agree. The goal is not about agreeing. The goal is not about everybody being on the same page. It's progress, not perfection. You have to be willing to move the needle forward by at least engaging in the conversations and being graceful and patient with each other, because we all make mistakes. No one is perfect at this. Regardless of how long you've been doing it, what books you read, how committed you are, we all have to figure out how to ease into this, but you have to do it. So ease in doesn't mean that we do something in August and we don't revisit it again until the following year. Ease in means that we're not starting with white privilege. It means you're going to ease into these conversations. You're going to do it every month so people develop that muscle memory.
So my question, we're talking a lot about terminology and definitions, right? My question revolves around that word tolerance, because we hear that a lot.
I don't like it.
I hate that word.
Vote it
It's
down.
a good question, right?
It needs to die.
Yeah,
Well, my question is, how do we get beyond that idea of just to tolerate?
because as Catholic schools, we are called, as a body of Christ, we're not called to tolerate each other, we're called to love each other and to help each other journey more fully into the mystery of God, into a deeper relationship. So if I, as a child of God, am walking with you as a child of God, then my goal is to make sure that I'm bringing you to your fullness of your humanity, because that's what sainthood is. To become what God created us to be, to its fullest extent, minus all the garbage we get from being broken. And so, in that, that's not tolerating somebody. It's loving them into their fullness. So, from my perspective, I don't use the word teaching tolerance, because I think that is so bare bones that doesn't even touch what we're called to do as Catholics.
It doesn't touch the human person. And then the other thing is that what tolerance gets at is we're going to love them we're going to love them as we identify their brokenness. Whereas being a saint means we're going to love them into wholeness and healing.
There's a slide with diagram circles.
And you know, again, I started with prayer, and we have to talk about Jesus. You cannot fight this battle without talking about Jesus, and you cannot fight this battle without inviting your students to begin to pray about the fractions in society in America.
And I think the teaching tolerance falls over in the integration side, where you're part of us, but we really don't accept you. Yeah. And so in that, and this is a slide that's from special education, but it fits to this discussion because truly what we want is inclusion, because then there's a full appreciation of the gifts and the beauty as God created us.
So let me add this though, because if we could go back to I have two slides that are actually offering some strategies. These come from the ADL's website under our education tab. Specifically, it's a couple more. So that's one, right? Tips and strategies for having conversations with young people around race and racism, and then teaching about race in their mostly white classroom. We don't have a whole lot of time, so I'm not going to go through those, but these are on our website and available for you. One of the things that I'm mindful of in this conversation about tolerance is that we don't need to be the language police for people, okay? Because each of us is going to use words. We can absolutely say, and I wanted to model by saying, you know what, I understand that what you meant by saying tolerance, and I think sometimes people might hear that differently as a way of saying, because if every time I say a word that you don't agree with, and you have a different perspective, then guess what's gonna happen? I'm shutting down and I'm not part of this conversation. Right? And so I don't want this audience taking away that, okay, well, as soon as I hear it, I gotta get on it, I gotta jump on it. We don't like it, right? That's clear. However, there's words that I use that people don't like.
But right, you see the concept being played out, you see the concept of tolerance, which is, you know, what we've just defined, which is tolerating a group of people, and rather than making them part of your family, you gotta drop the hammer on it. So you gotta know.
I do it, and this is where it's a yes and, right? Because I think about there are times where people say tolerance and they don't mean how you define it. And this is what I mean about being the language police. There's a wonderful article out there by Cody Charles. It's called The 10 Counterproductive Behaviors of Social Justice Educators. And in that, one of the things that he talks about is making a competition around social justice, right? Like, I know more than you, and I'm better than you, and how come you didn't know this? And he lays it out much more eloquently than I am in this 2 seconds. But I think that you all could benefit from being mindful. We want you to go out and help young people, but you help young people by starting with yourself and thinking about what your blind spots are, where you have work to do. I don't need to be checking other folks on the panel if I'm not thinking about ways in which I'm not always using the right language or doing things that might not be inclusive of everyone.
I hate to stop this conversation, but we do have an opening session coming up. So I'm going to ask Andrea to let you know how you continue to have this conversation. Andrea, why don't you give some instructions?
Yeah, so you may have noticed the slides were very sporadic. We wanted this to be a very open, unstructured dialogue, so that's why it went back and forth. So there's more information in those slides. I will upload them into the NCEA app. I will also tweet that out from NCEA. And this video, this has been recorded and will be on the NCEA YouTube channel in its entirety. So you'll have lots of ways to access this and to continue the conversations. You also all have access to the Padlet where there are questions we did not get to. They might be a place that you want to start having some questions, in your diocese, with your leaders, faculty, and of course these are things that are going to help us shape future conversations as well. So I want to thank everyone for their active participation.
And we're also certainly open to having another webinar, asking our panel to participate in that. So we understand this conversation could not be done justice in the time that we have, but we hope that you will continue. Does anyone have one final kind of closing statement that they would like to make on behalf of the panel?
Cardinal George wrote a book called Godly Humanism. And in it, he refers to Catholic schools as a place where, probably the last place from his perspective, where true freedom can be taught. And where there was the true freedom to expose students to the truth. Now, he went on to say that we're not doing a very good job at it many times, but that opportunity, because we're not connected to political parties or funding, standardized test scores and so forth, we have that opportunity. And I think as Catholic educators, I invite you to explore that truth, to truly create an opportunity environment where truth can be explored with your students.
And if I can interject, I don't know how many of you were at the opening mass in San Diego some years ago when Bishop's message was Catholic schools are the only schools in the country where truly the children of the working middle class, the elite, and immigrants can all go to school together. And if we go think back to that slide, where they are all included with the same access and the same opportunities in our public schools.
Okay, further vote. Tabari, would you like to say a final few words?
Yes, and thank you. And it's really about acknowledging that there are wonderful resources available to you all that I hope you all will capitalize on. ADL.org, we have resources for your families, for educators, for administrators. We have our Books Matter series where you can begin having these conversations. I mentioned earlier about dripping. It cannot be isolated to you getting approval from your administrator to do a training, and that's when this movement gets started. There are things that you can do in your classroom. There are things that you can do with your colleagues. There are things you can do at home. These issues are not going away. Whatever you think may happen in the next election, I know we talk about voting and things could play out differently, but the issues are still going to be present. In the same way that Obama did not change this country in the ways that people may have anticipated, in the same way that the civil rights movement had made significant strides, but still did not fix the issues, we have to continue to work on these things every single day if we're looking for our young people to have the skills and the confidence to be able to be the leaders that are going to change this country. So thank you all for being here today.
Thank you, Dan.
We have our friends from the Religious Freedom Center who left some flyers on the back. If you're interested in the Summer Institute, feel free to pick one of those.
Thanks for council.